Hey there, Heather Ho there, Chef Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to yet another Cutter Top 10 video to do with the Toronto Blue Jays, as this is the second video of our look into the Blue Jays before the Blue Jays get through to the LDS and all that. It is an important time to be a Blue Jay fan because the Blue Jays are the one seed in the AL, which is pretty amazing because all the roads through the American League, the LDS and the LCS, will have to head to Toronto as long as Toronto makes it through to the LCS. The World Series, Toronto probably won't be getting the uh, games 1 and 2. I think Milwaukee and Philly are ahead of the Blue Jays. So if either one of those make it and the Blue Jays hypothetically make the final, then the Blue Jays would be have started on the road. But that's okay. We started on the road in '92 and won the World Series. In '93 we started at home, we won, but that was on a rotational basis. Anyway, hopefully you didn't hear that. But anyway, let's talk about the top 10 Toronto Blue Jay moments of all time and all that. Just to let you know, there were a few regular season moments, but anyway, this is the moments. All right, number 10 is Edwin Encarnacion's 9 RBI day in 2015. I guess I can kind of say the Blue Jays when they beat the world champion Yankees 19-3 in 1977. But yeah, Roy Hell had 9 RBIs. But Edwin had a great day. It was against the Detroit Tigers. It was a 15-1 shellacking of the Tigers, which probably made my neighbor cringe. But anyway, Edwin just went off with what, a pair of 200 home runs and then a grand slam to ice it. 3 home runs, 9 RBIs. Amazing job and all that. So anyway, that's what happened. Edwin did a 9 RBI day in 2015. Georgie Springer almost did that on Canada Day 2025, but didn't get it. Number 9 is winning the division title in 1985. It was a great year to be a Blue Jay fan. Well, I was born in 1985. I was born April 9th, 1985. And lo and behold, the Blue Jays took on the Royals on opening day was April 8th, 1985. And strange as it sounds, Major League Baseball took a day off. Well, the Blue Jays took a day off, and their next game was April 10th. So literally, they skipped April 9th, 1985. So the Blue Jays would have been playing on that day. Well, the Leafs didn't play that day because the season was over a couple days earlier. The Raptors didn't exist, and there's no football in April. Nevertheless, the Blue Jays had a great moment in 1985. You know, they cleaned up their hitting. George Bell, Lloyd Moseby, and Jesse Barfield were one of the best outfield tandems the the 80s. That at that time. Cliff Johnson came in with Al Oliver to get some spark from the DH spot, where the Blue Jays have always been weakened by. You had Ernie Witt behind the plate. You had Willie Upshaw at first, the Basil Garcia, the Malconton at second, Tony Fernandez at short after they traded Griffin to Okie. The tandem of Rance Mulliniks and Garth Orge at third base. Of course, the outfield, and the pitching of Dave Stieb and Jimmy Key, who was a big beacon of light for the Blue Jays. So yeah, the 85 East, when the Yankees were so close, the Blue Jays led every day after May, which was great. Beat the Yankees in a 4-game critical series in New York, 3 games to 1. Yankees went to Toronto on the final weekend needing to do something. The Blue Jays needed to win 1 game to get the division, and they did on the Saturday. And then, they choked to the Royals in the LCS. The one time where you wish the LCS was best of 5. It was best of 5 in 1984, and then in 1985 it was best of 7. So that's the thing. So if it was best of 5, the Blue Jays would have went into the World Series against the Cardinals. It might have been a tough series. Maybe the Blue Jays would have taken it. And most important than that, in the NLCS, Ozzie Smith's home run in Game 5 would have been a pennant clincher alongside Chris Chambliss and Travis Ishikawa, for example. All right, number 8 is the Blue Jays home opener. Home opener slash franchise opener, 1977. It was April 7th, 1977. The Blue Jays were at home to the Chicago White Sox. And their first game, an exhibition stadium, called the Mistake by the Lake, although people call Cleveland Stadium that way. But no, it was Toronto Mistake by the Lake, in a sense, because we were closer to the lake. we were close to Lake Ontario, whereas Cleveland was close to Lake Cuyahoga, which is not one of the Great Lakes. Nevertheless, the Blue Jays had a decent exhibition season. They had some good players, and we're going to face the White Sox. They were down early, 1-0, and then Doug Ault, after 2 strikeouts, the first 2 Toronto batters came in, and then he swung on the first pitch and managed to sneak one into the left field bleachers, tying the game. But that was not all. Doug Ault would also hit another home run in the 4th inning to hit 2 home runs in a franchise opener, which was pretty impressive. Blue Jays would take care of business against the White Sox 9-5 in the snow, which, oh, yeah, it's weird how, you have baseball played in the snow, but kind of because the Blue Jays, this was their first ever game. They had to play it and all that. The Blue Jays, for one day and one day only, were on top of the AL East that year. They would go on to win 59 games and, yes, beat the 1977 eventual champion New York Yankees in New York 19-3. Number 7 is Devon White's catch in the 92 World Series. So the 92 World Series was huge. The Blue Jays finally got through. Game 1 was just Damon Berryhill taking Jack Morris deep. Jack Morris kind of faltering. Game 2 was David Cone on the bump, and he actually worked a great game. And then the Blue Jays were down by 1 in the 9th when Ed Sprague hit a 2-run home run off Jeff Reardon and tied the series. In Game 3, the Blue Jays were hosting the first World Series game in Canada in history. There was much brouhaha because the U.S. Marine Corps accidentally flew the Canadian flag upside down with the stem part up instead of the leaf. Fortunately, though, the Marine Corps got it right in Game 3 and basically asked to get rid of their faux pas, which was kind of amazing. So, yeah, the Blue Jays in 92. And then Game 3 happened in the 3rd inning with 2 runners on. Justice hit a nice pitch, but Devo made it the catch, slamming into the center field wall at the 400 mark to make the ball. Unfortunately, though, Terry Pendleton passed Deion Sanders on the base path, which meant that he was automatically out because Deion was the lead runner. So they got the second out, and then Kelly Gruber allegedly tagged Deion on the heel, which would have been the second triple play in Major League history in the World Series. The first was 1920. But the problem was Bob Davidson called him safe. Fortunately, the Blue Jays did win that game 2-1, so at least it helped. Number 6 was Fly That Parrot, Edwin Encarnacion's home run in the 2016 wildcard game. So for years, the major leagues had 2 teams make the playoffs and all that. When the Blue Jays came into the league in 1977, it was basically you in the AL East and the AL West, you're going to the ALCS to go to the World Series. And then in 1995, they changed it. Well, it was supposed to be 94, but we all know what happened in that season. In 95, they changed it to a wildcard format. 3 divisions in the AL and NL. Whoever won the divisions and the best team to not win the division by record got in. So 4 teams. But after the craziness of 2011 and how Boston and Atlanta got hosed, I think Major League Baseball wanted to help them. So anyway, 2012 they introduced what they call the wild card game. It was a 1-game winner take all between the 2 teams, the 2 best teams that didn't win the division, to get in as a wild card and face the 1 seed if they weren't from even if they're from the same division. Toronto needed a good series in Boston on the final weekend. They won 2 out of 3 to sink their teeth into it. They hosted Baltimore in the 1-game wild card. It was a tough game and all that. One Blue Jay fan created quite a fuss by pouring a beer on a Baltimore outfielder, and basically he lost his job because of that. Good riddance to Matt Drovich. But Baltimore was reluctant to send Zach Britton, their ace closer, to the mound, I guess waiting for a safe situation, which didn't happen. So Edwin came up with 2 on against Ubaldo Jimenez and took the ball to left field. It was gone, sending the Blue Jays to the ALDS against the Texas Rangers, and in a rematch from 2015, which we'll talk about later. But the 2016 series was big because the Blue Jays went into Texas and took care of the Texas Rangers in games 1 and 2. Went back home, and in a wild game in the 10th inning, Josh Donaldson scored the winning run to um, give the Blue Jays a sweep. And you'll never forget that one graphic. Like the camera looked at this one banner that says, "Would rather get punched in May than knocked out in October," because of the whole fight in May in Texas. But the Blue Jays got their revenge. Number 5 is Robbie Almer's big home run in the 92 LCS against the A's. Toronto finally did it. Well, Toronto got to the LDS and LCS, and everybody thought that the Blue Jays were going to choke again. They choked in 85, they fumbled in 89 and 91. Everyone thought the Blue Jays were going to be one of the great teams that would never make it to the World Series. But in 92, things were different. Despite Harold Baines hitting a game-winning home run in Game 1, the Blue Jays did win Games 2 and 3. And then in Game 4, the A's were up 6-1. Dennis Eckersley shut the door in the 8th inning, and the Blue Jays were down 6-3. And all of a sudden, Eckersley decided to do this fist-pumping jocular thing at the Blue Jays bench. The Blue Jays fouled revenge, and Robbie Almer came up to the plate against Eck in the top of the ninth and hit the tying home run. Blue Jays would score on a sac fly later in the game, and the Blue Jays ended up going up 3-1. Blue Jays lost Game 5, but no matter, they went home in Game 6 and beat the tar out of the A's. So yeah, that was big, and that told Dennis Eckersley to fuck off. Anyway, number 4 is Ed Sprague's home run 92. I guess I talked about it. I thought I didn't look at the thing, but yeah, Ed Sprague's home run was big. It turned everything around. The cats are meowing in the background. So anyway, Ed Sprague did his job and all that. You know, he was the third base. Well, third base would be occupied by Kelly Gruber, but Kelly Gruber went through a 20-plus at bat drought, like over 20 plus, and he was like, that was just terrible. And Gruber had some problems in 92 because he was faint. Everyone thought he was doing something bad. Never mind that. You know how things are. Anyway. So that just didn't work out so well. But yeah, Kelly Gruber fumbled Ed Sprague, who would become the third baseman in 93 for the Blue Jays once Gruber was traded away and nobody cried. Would come up from the trenches. That's what the Blue Jays called their bench, which had Derek Bell also be on the bench. So Sprague came up to the plate against Jeff Reardon, who was supposed to be the star closer, and then turned it around with a 2-run home run to make it 5-4. The Blue Jays won that game, and it helped them out. Number 3 is the bat flip from 2015. The Blue Jays were in for it. After Pittsburgh made the playoffs in 2014, the Blue Jays became the team with the longest playoff drought. Since 1993, they missed the playoffs and all that. They had a few wildcard runs, but failed miserably. Of course, being in what they call the hardest division in baseball didn't help matters because of the whole thing with a lot of things. So anyway, the Blue Jays ended up winning the division in 2015. They faced Texas in the division series. Blue Jays were down 2-0. It looked like it was game, set, match. But Blue Jays went into Texas to win 2 straight. It was 2-2, and then a legendary Game 5 on a Wednesday afternoon. Texas got ahead in the 7th inning thanks to a controversial play, which was, pissing off the Blue Jay fans. And then in the bottom of the 7th, the Blue Jays came up, and Texas inexplicably got not 1, not 2, but 3 errors, which was weird and all that. Blue Jays managed to score a run, and then with two on, Batista came up to the plate against Jared Dyson, and I think it was Dyson or Sam Dyson, sorry, and took him over the wall in left center at 6-3. And I was watching the game with Bill Lang in Waterloo at the Waterloo University Waterloo student life center. I guess you can call it that. But yeah, it was amazing to see the fans just go bonkers when the Blue Jays did that 3-run home run. And thankfully, though, the Blue Jays went on to win that thing. But unfortunately, Kansas City took us out in the LCS because David Price was just piss poor in the playoffs. Hey, that's an alliteration. But yeah, the backflip will always live in Blue Jays history. Number 2 is winning it all in 92. So the Blue Jays finally got to the World Series. They beat Oakland. They went through 3 games. Like I talked about the first 3 games in detail. Game 4, Jimmy Key, and what would be his last start as a Blue Jay because the next year he went in free agency to the Yankees. Fuck that. Decided, hey, you know what? I'll do it. And then Jimmy Key pitched a great game. The Blue Jays were up 3 games to 1. It was up to Jack Morris to shut them down, but Morris fumbled, and Lonnie Smith hit a grand slam to force the series back in Atlanta. Game 6, the Blue Jays had a chance in the bottom of the ninth to win it. Well, the Braves were batting in the bottom of the ninth, and then Francisco Cabrera, the former Blue Jay prospect, and the guy who helped the Braves get to the World Series in the first place with that Game 7 walk-off hit against the Pirates, ended up at the plate, and Kenny Maldonado threw a terrible pitch that hit the backstop. Fortunately, though, the winning run didn't score. Blue Jays would go into the 11th, and Dave friggin' Winfield, of all people, who only had 1 extra base hit in the World Series, well, 1981 and then 1992. Everyone thought he was past due, but the dude was 40 years old and got 100 RBIs. Like you knew he was going to come back with a vengeance, and he did. He ended up hitting a 2 RBI double. Braves scored a run off the Blue Jays, but Mike Timlin came in and got Otis Nixon to bunt right at him. That was a terrible bunt by Nixon. Timlin throws to Carter, who jumps up and down several times, and the Blue Jays were the 92 world champs. And the World Series would fly north of the border, as Sean McDonough would say. And of course, number 1 has to be Joe Carter's walk-off home run. Come on, you really think that it wouldn't be Joe Carter? Are you nuts? Every good Blue Jay fan knows that. So here's the sitch. So the 93 Blue Jays were better, but they suffered through one of the biggest roster turnovers by a defending world champ ever. I mean, when you look at like Gruber was gone, Tom Hankey was gone, Jimmy Key was gone, Manny Lee was gone, Kenny Maldonado was soon gone. Derek Bell left because of his nonchalantness in the spring training. He was traded to the Padres for Darren Jackson, who then got flipped to the Mets for Tony Fernandez because Schofield just had to get hurt. Oh yeah, Alfredo Griffin. No, Griffin was still around. Many bits and pieces had to happen, but the '93 Blue Jays pulled through. I mean, Whamco, WHAMCO, for White, Henderson, Alomar, Molitor, Carter, Ulrud. Yeah, Winfield left for Minnesota, whereas Paul Molitor came over from Milwaukee. Blue Jays almost lost Joe Carter to Kansas City. But yeah, well, they lost David Cone to Kansas City in '93, but they picked up Dave Stewart from Oakland. It was a humongous event to behold. And the Blue Jays got to the World Series. Well, they got Ricky Henderson in a trade deadline deal, which actually worked out for the Blue Jays, getting the all-time best hitter of all leadoff hitter of all time. But anyhow, '93 playoffs against the White Sox, who used their pitching to their advantage to win the division. The Blue Jays went into Chicago for the first few games, beat up on Blackjack McDowell, who ended up being the Cy Young winner in '93. And then in game 2, Dave Stewart had a massive bases loaded, no outs problem in the 6th, but he got out of it without any damage at all. Blue Jays would lose the next two games at home, and then Game 5, they finally pounced on Chicago, and then Game 6 again on Blackjack McDowell. Blue Jays would go to the World Series to take on the dirtbag Philadelphia Phillies, the rough and tough Gashouse gang, if you will, who shocked the Braves in the LCS in 6 games. Blue Jays got to start Game 1 at home because of the rotation, and they won. Philly made it close. Game 2, they lost. Game 3 was the big moment in Blue Jays history when they decided to put Paul Molitor at first base and not play John Olerud, who was the AL batting champion. Reason being because in the NL at the time, no DH for World Series games. So that's what happened, and the Blue Jays had to go with someone else. And Molitor paid Seal Gaston's patience with that great day, including a triple and a home run in the third game. Game 4 was a clusterfuck, 15-14 Blue Jays. As the Phillies were up 14-9, the Blue Jays put Tony Castillo, the pitcher, in to bat for himself, and everyone thought the Blue Jays were conceding the game. But then the 8th inning happened. 6 runs later, the Blue Jays were up 15-14 and hung on to win. Curt Schilling pitched a masterful 5-hitter in Game 5. And then Game 6 was when the Blue Jays had a chance to win on home turf. Well, obviously Game 7 would have been in Toronto as well. But anyway, it doesn't matter. As the Blue Jays did what they had to do, they were up 5-1. Paul Molitor basically making himself World Series MVP. And then the Phillies came back to go up 6-5. And then in the 9th, Ricky Henderson walks up 4 pitches from Mitch Williams, who was tiring. You could see it. And then all of a sudden, lots of things happened. And, Paul Molitor hit a single. And then Joe Carter came to the plate, swung badly at a pitch that should have been ball 3. And then on the next pitch, 2-2, he deposited it into the left field stands. And Tom Cheek's famous call, "Touch 'em all, Joe. You'll never hit a bigger home run in your life." People argue a lot saying who was the bigger home run, Joe Carter in 93 or Bill Mazeroski in 1960. You tell a Canadian that, it's Joe Carter. If you take an American, maybe Mazeroski. Well, obviously not in Philadelphia. They have been lamenting that for years and years and years, despite winning the 2008 World title. But yeah, the Blue Jays hopefully will have a moment in 2025. And here's a stat for everybody. Every year that ends with a 5 in Blue Jays history has been either a division title or last in the division. To explain, 1985, they won the division. 1995, they were the worst team, I think the second worst team in baseball. 2005, they were last in the division. 2015, they won the division. And of course, 2025, they won the division. So yeah, take that stat with a grain of salt. Hey, I'm Jeff Diamond.